Welcome back, and a special welcome to the final part of our final programme of what is hopefully not the final year of all. Time for us to look back on what's been an extraordinary year of global events, including the Arab Spring, the assassination of Osama bin Laden, the Euro crisis, and the beginnings of the US presidential race. To discuss some of these events, as many as we can manage to get to, we have a sparkling panel for you. Lord Owen, David Owen, is a former British Foreign Secretary, was also, of course, an EU peace negotiator in the former Yugoslavia. Yasmin Alabai-Brown is a distinguished columnist with the Independent newspaper. Stryker Maguire is the senior editor at Bloomberg Markets, a monthly magazine looking at the world of money. And joining us from Doha, we're delighted to welcome Shadi Hamid, who's spent much of the past 12 months looking at the spread of the Arab Spring in his position as Director of Research at Brookings Institution, brackets, Doha branch. We welcome you all, welcome all of you, and let's start with the Arab Spring. Did it come as a surprise in this year? Were you expecting anything like this towards the end of last year? Yasmin.
No, it was, I mean, we got so used to a static, miserable situation, I think, across many of the Middle Eastern nations, most of them, I would say, that nobody thought it could happen, or it could happen in this way. And how Arabs became, I mean, I'm just so, it's so wonderful. From being the basket case, as the West always regarded them, you know, easy to manipulate, deserve dictatorships, to become the inspiration now for our young people. It's extraordinary, extraordinary.
Shadi, over there in Doha, did it take you by surprise when it started happening in Egypt and so on?
Well, in a way it was surprising, but I think it's worth noting that many people saw it coming. We just didn't know when. But here's the thing, I mean, autocracies don't last forever. By definition, they're temporary. So if it wasn't going to happen this year, it was going to happen at some other time. And I mean, just to go back to the Bush administration, I mean, there was a time in 04, 05 where President Bush and Condoleezza Rice would say the status quo is untenable. And that's the kind of thing we heard for a long time. So we knew, but not in this, as Yasmin said, not in this kind of striking way where it kind of spread all across the region at once.
Right. David, what did you make of it before this year and then?
I was in Cairo 2 years ago, and I certainly found there fascinating changes. And I went to a conference of journalists and women journalists who were clearly Muslim Brotherhood, very adventurous, bright, able people, and I certainly left feeling there's a change here, but I was surprised.
Yeah. Stryker.
Well, I think it's fair to say we were all surprised,
yeah,
pleasantly surprised. I do think it's important to remember that there was an economic dimension to this as well as a political dimension, because there's so many young, unemployed people in the Middle East and North Africa that's I think that was also a key factor. And then the involvement of the middle class, which itself is, you know, has economic roots.
And the new technology.
Yes.
It could not have happened had we not had Twitter and blogging, and, you know, it just couldn't have happened. So all of it came together. I was in Cairo in Jordan in September. And in that middle bit between the first, you know, breakthrough and this, during Eid, in fact, just at the end of Ramadan, when it was quite exciting, but you felt people were already nervous about what was going to come at them. So it was a very dramatic time to be there in September.
Well, that's a vital point, because everybody was moved and inspired a lot by the beginning of the Arab Spring. What do we feel about its progress now? I mean, is it stalled? Is it still going well, or have the bad signs come in as well as the good signs? Shadi, what do you think?
Well, I mean, it's certainly taken a turn for the worse in many countries. I mean, I think the hope was that other dictators would learn from Egypt and Tunisia and say, let's actually try to meet the demands of our own people so we don't suffer the same fate. But actually, they seem to have learned the opposite lesson. Hold on to power at any cost, use brute repression, fight to the very last drop of blood. And of course, in Libya, Gaddafi took that quite literally. And unfortunately, the U.S. and other Western powers, but particularly the U.S., have not played a very positive role. And I'm not sure if the U.S. is on the right side of history. So it's unfortunate to see that the international community is not supporting the aspirations of the people on the ground as much as it could. I mean, part of that is budgetary constraints, but you know, one wishes this could have happened at a time where the West was ready to commit billions to help boost the economies in this region. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case. It is a cliche, but we have a very long way to go, and I think people have to be prepared for bloodshed and instability. It's not going to be easy. I mean, democratic transitions historically are very complex, and there's a lot of push and pull. So I think going forward, 2012 and beyond, let's just prepare ourselves for that.
Right, and Stryker, what about the American situation in all of this? The familiar question is, why didn't NATO, for instance, do what it did in Libya, do it in Syria, and so on?
Well,
but there are reasons not. But I mean, do you think that the American influence is lessening?
Well, the answer to a lot of these questions is one word, which is Iraq. And Iraq, basically, what the U.S. and the U.K. did in Iraq poisoned, I think, their ability to act in many countries. Syria, I think, is a special case because you're talking about, you know, a country that has an army of whatever figure you believe, 200 to 400,000. It's much more complicated. But I think there is another thing. You want these revolutions to be native. You want them to grow out of something in the country. It's one thing to kind of help them along in hopefully in legal ways. It's one thing to do that, but it's another. You don't want to have a revolution branded as an American coup, for example.
Right. Yasmin,
Yes.
you're nodding there.
And this is the contradiction I found when I was in the Middle East. That quite a lot of young people would say, this is our revolution. We don't want the West to intrude. And at the same time, they would say, where is America? Where is the UK when we need them? And they were kind of holding both positions. And I don't know if you would agree with me, Shadi, that there is this kind of contradiction I found.
I agree with Yasmin that there is this kind of schizophrenic love-hate thing that I think many Arab protesters have. Ideally, they wouldn't want the West to play a big role. But when you're bleeding to death, you don't care who the doctor is. And you saw that in Libya. You see that now in Syria, where they're pleading for the U.S. and Europe to do more. Because at the end of the day, you can have all the protests internally, but sometimes you need international factors to tip the balance one way or the other. And we've seen that Libya, Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, international factors matter. So let's not pretend, and the Obama administration always says it's not about us as Americans, it's about them. But we should note that America has been supporting repressive dictators for more than 5 decades. I think there's a moral responsibility to try to undo that tragic past and begin to do the right thing.
David.
I think Syria is the most interesting geopolitically, because if Syria changes and ceases to be the conduit through which Hezbollah's help from Iran and pours its poison into both Lebanon and into West Bank and Gaza, particularly Gaza, then there will be a very big change. And the whole revolutionary changes around Israel's border are forcing Israel to have to rethink. They cannot go on with the present policy of just isolating themselves. They have to readdress the region around them, which they've, over the last 10 years, more or less sort of insulated themselves from. And I think we will see, therefore, very big changes. I think we're really only at the start. We will not see America in the lead. This time, France and Britain will take a lower profile, and it's going to be Turkey that will be the hinge country.
The problem of Israel is going to get worse and worse, because this idea of special privileges, special standards, you know, and actually support of dictators for and of dictators in the region. I hope you're right that Israel's waking up, but listening to their leadership, I fear not.
Well, listen to the voices of Mossad and the army, retired people but influential, who have spoken out forcibly against unilateral Israeli preemptive attack on Iran. It doesn't, unfortunately, exclude that it may happen sometime before the November US election, but it would be a massive mistake if Israel was to do it. And I think by having this criticism from powerful people inside Israel, it's made America much less likely to give a nod or a wink. And here in this country, I think it's vital, the British, because of our clandestine association with Israel in 1956, I wanted them to say publicly, we will not support a unilateral action. If the world has to deal with this, I hope we won't militarily. I hope it can be done through sanctions and negotiation. But if we do, it has to be done the world itself doing it. And it means the United States taking a lead role, Israel doing it for them, and dragging us all in because of the Straits of Hormuz being blocked. They should not count on it. We would be very foolish to be dragged into such a war.
Well, we've touched there on the subject of Iran and so on, and what's going to happen to do with Iran, etc. What about, Shadi, with you? What's the view you get from Doha and its surrounds in terms of what they think is going to happen in that situation, the Iran-Israel possible bombing, impossible bombing?
Yeah, well, I mean, Qatar is a little bit different than the other Gulf countries because it has a working relationship with Iran, but in the rest of the Gulf, there's a kind of hatred and paranoia of Iran that's really hard to describe. And that's one of the few things that the Saudis and the Israelis agree on, that Iran is the primary threat in the region. I mean, that said, I mean, I don't think it's very likely that we are going to have a strike. And I think there is a realization that it wouldn't be that effective in terms of really stopping it permanently, and this nuclear capability. I think the bigger issue, though, for Israel is, I hope it's not the case, but 2011 could very well be remembered as the year the two-state solution died. I hope not, but I think the window of opportunity is really closing right now. When you're seeing the balance of power shifting, the Palestinians now are more confident. They see these emerging Arab democracies that are supporting their cause. When you're in a stronger position, there's less of an incentive to compromise. I think the Palestinians now feel that history is on their side, and the Israelis, meanwhile, are getting bunkered down in this kind of isolationist mentality. So the two sides couldn't be further apart. And sometimes it looks like a kind of slow motion train wreck. And you know, I wish it were otherwise, but it's hard to be optimistic.
Thank you very much there, Shadi. Striker, how does this situation strike you? Israel and the world, Israel and Iran, Israel and America, etc.
Well, I hope Shadi's right about the fact that there won't be an attack. I wouldn't claim to be an expert on Israel, but my sense is that the voices that we hear out of Israel all the time are not the voices of Israelis or the Israeli people. I think that there must be in Israel a despair about the way that Israel has become this sort of block that prevents the whole rest of the Middle East from moving and from anything getting accomplished. However, it is a fact there's going to be an election in the United States, in November, and Israel, that issue is always big in American elections, and it often prevents things from happening that should happen, or allows things to happen that shouldn't happen.
Let's bring in another country mixed into the equation with the United States, the situation between the United States now and Pakistan. I mean, it's difficult to say which distrusts the other most, isn't it? Yasmin?
There is no trust. I don't think there has been trust for a very long time. And one can understand why, because both have played devious games with each other, really. What has not been acceptable is that the actions of the United States and the military establishment in Pakistan, is that ordinary people have died and have suffered. And even their bodies aren't counted, let alone names. We don't even have body counts anymore of the number of drone attacks and this ceaseless violence. Pakistan is a failed state in my view, and has been for a very long time. It makes me very depressed to say this, because my father came from Pakistan, my mother's family came from India, and the two countries, to see how they've developed, how differently they've developed. Same people, they're the same people. One chose a kind of religious nationhood and bad politics, and the other we can see flourishing. I have very, very depressing vibes about what comes next in Pakistan, whether they're abandoned by the United States or not. I think the future is bleak.
Maybe bleak. Can they? Could the United States cut Pakistan off?
Yes.
It's a crucial factor,
Yes,
isn't it?
it's the new big geopolitical shift. Russia has used its influence on the neighboring states and itself ensured that America can resupply Afghanistan without going through Pakistan. This is the big, big change. Pakistan made a miscalculation. They thought they were in an absolute pole position and that they had to be dealt with because of the supply routes. That has shifted. And now Pakistan has to wake up quite quickly. But the one thing that is not coming clearly from Obama regime, and I'm surprised, is unless things are happening which we don't know about, there does not seem to be a proper negotiation going on with the Taliban. And that can only really be effective if you go back to the grouping of involving all the countries that abut Afghanistan. And that includes China. And I think that negotiation must take place, and then Pakistan have an opportunity to come back into a collective responsibility. But the days where Pakistan were going to dictate the settlement are, in my view, very nearly over, and they've got to catch up.
They've got to catch up.
Or America's just got to cut aid. I think it's tough love, actually. You've got to be pretty
David,
aggressive.
I don't think America's behaved very well either.
No, I don't.
You know, they just haven't.
Well, they're cutting off of those funds to the Palestinians.
And what worries me about Afghanistan is what happens. The women are being abandoned in this new geopolitical settlement. When Taliban's values on women prevail, we know what happened previously. And that really is heartbreaking to me.
Well, I hope it won't happen. It's a country I love. I went there when I was a student. But we don't dictate to the Afghans. The Afghans sort themselves out. And this great mistake that any country, whether however powerful, will tell the Afghans how to live their life. They are a decentralized community. There will be parts of Afghanistan where women's rights, hard won, will stay. There will be parts of Afghanistan, I'm sad to tell you, where they will revert back.
But given the situation is so difficult and so on, rather than 2014, should we stay longer to strengthen the resistance to the Taliban, or get out sooner and take those risks?
I think a path has been set, both by Obama and by the British new government under Prime Minister Cameron, and I think that timetable should be held to. You can't go on extending timetables for the military. They've been given all the opportunity. This is not going to be a military solution. There's going to have to be a diplomatic and a political judgment call. I'm fed up with the military directing a political process, and this has got out of control in Afghanistan and here in the UK. Too many generals telling us how to do it. They had their opportunity. By and large, the politicians and the military have failed abysmally in Afghanistan, mainly because they just will not listen. We've tried to impose a centralized pattern. Kabul, big, powerful capital. It's never been a big, powerful capital, never will be a big, powerful capital. It will always be a decentralized country.
What do you feel about the situation between America and Afghanistan?
Well, I think the US and the UK and their partners went into Afghanistan with all these promises of how that Afghanistan would become a new country in effect, and that freedoms would be granted to people who hadn't had them before, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as I think David is suggesting, the driving force behind everything that happens in Pakistan is our desire to get the heck out of there. It's all about the exit, and it's and that may have consequences, but the fact is that that is the driving force. It's like get out of there and get out of there on schedule.
Just time to mention the dear beloved euro here. What is going to happen to the euro, do you think, in the 12 months ahead?
I don't personally think the euro of 17 can survive, nor should it survive. Many countries can go on with the euro, but a euro which is trying to bridge the Northern Europe and the Mediterranean Europe is not going to survive. And if they go on because of the fear of contagion, they risk the whole eurozone collapsing.
Yasmin, how do you see it?
I'm just going to keep faith.
Who with? Who in?
With what they're trying to do at the moment. Not because I think Germany and France are necessarily the best equipped, but I do think to give up on this thing in the way that Cameron and so on are giving up, it just feels wrong to me. In a year's time, maybe I'll be able to make a judgment. I want this thing to succeed. I don't think it's in any of our interests for it to collapse, but maybe it will.
What do you feel about this over there in Doha?
All of this is very troubling because, you know, at such a historic moment like this, you need leadership. And I think that the Arab Spring is comparable to 1945 for 1848. And in those times of great historical ferment, someone has to lead. And I wish there was an opportunity, for example, to devise some kind of Marshall Plan-like approach for the Middle East, similar to what was done in Europe in the 1940s and 50s. So that abdication of leadership is very troubling, which is why the US and Europe really have to get their houses in order as soon as possible.
Right, and coming to you, Stryker, you're an American and you're based in Europe. What do you see as the future of the euro?
Well, I think it's important to remember you can reconfigure the euro and which countries have it, which countries don't have it, without giving up on what I think Yasmin was calling the thing, which is the idea of Europe, and the idea that we don't want to return to World War II, World War I. We want to get away from that. But I think that just because the euro as a single currency changes in nature, it's not the end of Europe.
I agree totally with this. They cannot grip the fact that some of those countries simply cannot live within eurozone disciplines, and to plan for a successful separation, and a generous one. Those countries that leave will need help, not just from the IMF. The IMF ought to be handling the whole thing globally, and Europe should be helping them. And the richer countries, and I include Britain outside the Eurozone, thank God, which I've never wanted us to be a member, must help countries like Greece, like Portugal, like Spain, probably probably Ireland, we're not sure about that, and Italy. And so that the adjustment is made as painless as possible. It will be painful, it will be difficult, but hanging on all the time is dragging the concept of Europe down, and it's doing great harm to the world economy.
Right, and there, alas, that's all we've got time for. Time has rocketed, thanks to all four of you. We say a big thank you to you, and we'll be back in 2012. We'll be back in 2012, in fact, on January the 13th. Friday the 13th, how appropriate, how lucky, how unlucky, let's find out. Hope you can join us then. Until then, happy holidays and goodbye for now.